And thank you everyone for joining us today for the Dispensaries, Grow House, Vape shops, and the potential environmental risk to CRE property. I want to encourage you to share your video. It'll just kind of help everyone feel a little more connected while we continue to do these virtual presentations. Do keep your microphone on mute just to minimize and avoid any of the background noises that just happen. But if you do have a question, of course, you're encouraged to have questions. Please unmute. You can also use the chat feature. By now, I think everyone's really familiar with Zoom, but you do have a chat feature that you can access in the menu bar along the bottom of your screen. Most screens, if you're using a laptop or desktop. But please type in your question, and then either one of the gentlemen will read that, or we will help get that read to the presenters at the end of the presentation. If you registered for today's program, we will email some materials your way after the presentation. And at this time, I would like to introduce you to our presenters, Derrick, Denis, and Paul Anderson with Clark Seif Clark Incorporated. Derrick, the floor is all yours. Please feel free to share any information about your background and your company, and let us know what you're here to tell us.
All right, fantastic. So the title of this stellar presentation is Potential Environmental Issues when Leasing to Marijuana Dispensaries, Grow Houses, and Vape Shops. And it's very timely. We were discussing at the earlier on the call that with the recent voting outcome, this couldn't be more timely. So let's go ahead and get started. Who is this gray bearded guy before you? I wasn't always gray bearded, but that's the Indoor Air Quality Association symbol. I'm a father. I have a 27-year-old daughter. I'm a husband. I have a blankety blank year old wife. She won't let me tell you that. I'm an Eagle Scout, so I live my life in that regard. Be prepared, and you know, a Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. I do a lot of tactical training. This is me training with Chris Tonto Peranto. He's the guy from Benghazi you may be familiar with. I'm an ordained minister. If you ever get a chance to conduct a wedding, do it. It's the best seat in the house, and you get this crazy power where you go like this, and everybody stands up, and you go like this, and everybody sits down. Actually, it's probably too much power. I'm a jiu-jitsu practitioner. My wife and I own Arizona Hair Company, so go get your haircut at Arizona Hair Company. We have 18 salons and 260 employees that would love your support. This is us doing our annual free haircuts for the underprivileged at the Christmas Salvation Army event. And wow, what a great event if you're looking for volunteer opportunities. I hope they're going to have it this year, but it probably won't because of COVID. Everything's blaming on COVID. My passion, though, is indoor environmental quality. I've been doing this for 26 years. I have a variety of certifications. I've been on the board of directors of various organizations in the indoor environment and industrial hygiene realm. I went to Phillips University, or old PU, and so destined to be in the air quality business, right? PU. And I've testified in lots of trials. So hopefully I never see you, you never need me, but if you do, I'm here. And then to my right is Mr. Paul Anderson. And I'll let him introduce himself actually here.
Paul Anderson, been doing this for about 20 years. I have various certifications as well. I also went to old PU, so makes sense that I'm here. Also went to University of Arkansas with a master's in chemistry. And wife and dog, that's, what more do you need?
So that's us, and we're gonna get started with the technical part of our presentation in a moment. Paul and I actually are also inventors. We invented sewer gas solutions. #1 cause of odor in buildings is dry traps and sewer gas infiltration. So if any of your buildings have an issue where the traps dry out and people smell a bad smell, or they think they smell natural gas, or they evacuate the building because there's a natural gas leak, quote unquote, or you have a roach problem, or you have fire life and safety systems that are failing because they're oxidizing, because sewer gas contains hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide and other problem causing issues, let us know and we'd be happy to get you more information. This is what happens when the trap is dry. Sewer gases come into the building, and if you put our product in, the traps won't evaporate for months, up to a year. So highly recommend, especially in your vacant suites. We both work for a company called Clark Seif Clark, which is an industrial hygiene environmental testing company. We work around the country. I teach around the world, but we predominantly work around the US, and we help solve what is that smell? What do we know about asbestos? Hey, I think I have a formaldehyde issue. Somebody died in my building. Can you find out why? Or maybe they died and were there for a while. How do we get rid of the odor? Clandestine drug labs, lead-based paint, fentanyl. So any of these kinds of things inside a building that can make you sick or kill you, Paul and I have probably been standing hip deep in it on multiple occasions. So if you have questions about these, please let us know. All right. The devil, of course, is in the details. We can't make you an expert in all things marijuana and all things vape shop in the short time we have together. But we hope that this gives everybody a pretty good taste of what you might need to consider if you own or are managing a building that is considering having one of these types of tenants, or maybe you already have one of these types of tenants. So first step is leave as little to chance as possible, right? Preparation is the key to success. That was Paul Brown. He's a famous NFL coach. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. That was attributed to several people, but Ben Franklin. And then one of my favorites for a job that we did for Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So let's learn some things so that you are more prepared. They're going to talk about how marijuana dispensaries, grow houses, and vape shops affect the structure, the owner, the management, the current tenants, and then your future tenants. So all of these entities can be impacted negatively in some way by the presence of a marijuana dispensary, a grow house, or a vape shop. A dispensary, of course, is a place that sells marijuana. A grow house is a place that grows marijuana plants and or processes marijuana products. In Arizona, they're typically indoors, so warehouses get converted into basically a giant greenhouse with multiple stages of plant growth. They're quite high tech in many cases. They have light arrays with different wavelengths of light that move on a track. They control temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide, etc. And of course, vape shops are places that sell e-cigarettes or e-cigarette juice or vape sauce or whatever the kids are calling it these days, right? So recent voting outcome, marijuana ballot measures passed in 5 states this November. That adds to the list now. So we have 33 states that allow marijuana use either medicinally or recreationally. And recreationally, it's allowed in 15 states now. Of course, Arizona voters had previously approved medical marijuana use. Now we have recreational use. So I expect there's going to be an uptick in your demand for buildings to house facilities that do marijuana sales, potentially marijuana growth and processing. So we're not lawyers and we're not giving legal advice, but just so you know, just because a state passes a law doesn't mean it's federally legal. So federally, marijuana sale and use is still illegal. It is not legal. And what does that potentially mean? Well, your general liability insurance may deny a claim that you make, or various insurance may deny a claim that you make, and they'll use what's called an illegal activity policy exclusion. So they'll say, well, you normally have coverage for a fire, but since you have a marijuana operation in your building and it's federally illegal, we're not going to cover you. Again, I'm not an insurance expert either. Paul is not an insurance expert or an attorney, but keep that in mind that there is a risk to the owner and the manager, all the people with command and control of the building, because marijuana is federally illegal. Also, because it's federally illegal, you may not have bank account protection in your federally insured bank accounts. And then if you have commingled funds, let's say you have tenant funds from a suite that does not have marijuana, or a building that doesn't have marijuana activities in it, and you commingle that with the other building funds, if the federal government chooses to seize your account, they're not going to parse it out. Most likely, they're going to take all of that money. So just keep that in mind. An example, again, that we know firsthand is we have dispatched to many fires. We do a lot of wildfire smoke and structure fire smoke investigations. And when the wineries burned a couple of years ago, of course, they're burning every year. This is the new normal. They burned, their crops burned, their buildings burned, vehicles, they had business interruption, and they were all covered by their insurance. So it's unfortunate that they were burned, but they had, asset protection, business protection. The grow operations that were basically, you have wineries and you have grow operations that are outdoors in Northern California. Those businesses burned in the same way. Their vehicles, the crops, the buildings, and of course their businesses were interrupted, but they were generally sure out of luck, or SOL, because it's a family-friendly presentation. There's a stigma. Your client, you, the property management company, you, the building owner, need to consider there's a stigma. You may have tenants that don't want to be in the same building because it is a current or a former drug sales or use facility. Some people don't want to move next door to these facilities. They also may not want to do business with someone who's leasing to companies because they have a position on the use of marijuana, even though it's state legal, right? So keep that in mind, that there is a stigma, and you want to have those discussions with your building owners and all of your team members before you start generating leases. Security. One of the interesting things about dispensaries are they are cash businesses. And in our experience, and in my opinion, cash businesses, high cash businesses, are security threats. Drugs and cash may attract ne'er-do-wells, right? Undesirable patrons that can harm your building or occupants thereof. And so you want to keep that in mind. Your tenants should all have a security program, but your tenants who sell marijuana should certainly have a very robust security plan to handle cash, to get cash in and out of the building, et cetera. So one of the biggest things with grow houses is they are water centric. What does that mean? They use a ton of water. And if they're going into a building that's not a design build to be a grow house, which is very common, we work in a lot of buildings that are used in a way that they were not designed. We do sound studio work for, major movie companies, and they just take a warehouse in Burbank and put a bunch of insulation on the walls. And that's how they make it a sound studio. Well, that has all kinds of problems. And so grow houses have the same issue. They take a building that was not designed to have tons of water, humidity, et cetera, and they're adding it. And so there is a high probability of water damage to your walls, floors, cabinets, and your HVAC system. There's a high probability of leaks. And so not only will those leaks affect the tenant, that is the grow operation, but adjacent tenants can also be recipients of these water releases. So I know most of you probably have relationships with restoration companies, and they are very happy to see grow houses because they leak all the time. If you have the option when they are you're negotiating their lease and their tenant improvement work, you want to encourage in some way water robust, water tolerant building materials, water management systems, curbing, water alarms. There's a lot of things you can do to help mitigate, mitigate water releases, and then reduce the effect that they have on the building. And then lastly, alert you to a water release that might happen in the middle of the night. So there are water alarm systems that can be installed that will page you if there is a water event in one of these buildings. They also, in addition to having liquid water use, they have very high humidity. And so your air conditioning system that's on your building right now does two things. It cools your building and it dehumidifies your building. And so with such high humidity, you may overwhelm your air conditioning system. It may not be able to survive that high humidity environment. And then you end up with oxidation on things. You get rust in places you wouldn't normally get rust. So some people think, it's just a little rust on the T-grid. Well, remember that oxidation is occurring on things like the smoke alarms. Oxidation is occurring on things like your fire panel. And so those are human health and safety risks. And so if you're going to have a tenant that is a grow operation, they need to give you some sort of plan, some sort of assurance that they have considered those things and have modified the building in such a way to protect those fire, life, and safety systems. Elevated humidity, of course, can lead to increases in mold and bacteria. Now, a lot of these grow operations, they are very concerned about mold and bacteria because that damages their crops. So they'll do everything they can to control it on their crops. But again, water releases to building materials that are not water tolerant, such as drywall, wood cabinets, pressed wood building materials, will result in the growth of mold. And when that tenant turns over, they're going to be giving you a moldy building. While they're occupying the building, their employees are going to be exposed to an extraordinary amount of mold potentially, and that may affect the neighboring suites. Here's some visible mold growth on a wall, and if you look to the left, it looks all kind of the same. But if you look to the right, a lot of people will say, what kind of mold is growing? That depends where you take your sample. If you take your sample on the black colored mold, that's one species. The white colored mold is another. You don't have to be an expert to know there's multiple types of mold growing there. The most important thing as a building owner manager you need to know is that visible mold growth is unacceptable, and the mold in the air should be similar inside your building to the mold outdoors. That's what's considered an acceptable environment. If your grow operations are pushing water to the adjacent suite, they may have mold in the wall cavity, but not see it, and that might add to the mold counts in their air. And of course, asbestos is always an issue. What year was asbestos banned for use in the US? I'll give you guys a chance to think about it. And 1, 2, 3, the answer is, that's correct, David. Very good. Never. Asbestos is still being used in building materials. See how I did that? That's because you're on the video screen, and we appreciate you. The answer is never. Asbestos is still being used in building materials this day. Now, if your building is built pre-1980, there's asbestos in a lot of the materials. And if it's built after 1980, it can still be present in materials. And the EPA requires presumption or testing of asbestos in the building materials, regardless of age. So what does that mean? Well, if you have a grow house or you have a vape shop where you're going to have to go in and gut it when they leave, you're going to have the expense of asbestos testing up front. And if asbestos is present, you're going to have the cost of addressing asbestos containing materials. So my recommendation, Paul's recommendation, is when you negotiate release, if they turn it over and building materials are damaged, of course, they owe you the cost to fix that stuff. Don't let them walk away just by holding their deposit. You need some sort of mechanism in place so that you can recover the costs, not only of the asbestos testing, not only of the repairs, but the asbestos abatement cost, which is going to be an upcharge if asbestos is present. And that's basically what I just said. I get a little ahead of myself sometimes. One thing to consider, if you didn't know this, asbestos inspections in Maricopa County have won up the feds a little bit. And one of the biggest ones is an asbestos survey is only good for 12 months in Maricopa County. You can only rely on it for 12 months. The rest of the state, they're good indefinitely. The reasoning for that was that tenant improvements happen a lot, and they wanted to make sure they captured new materials. But just keep that in mind if you didn't know. EPA regulates asbestos in the environment. That's who requires the testing. OSHA requires you not expose workers above the permissible exposure limit. The only way to really know that is to test the materials before you disturb them, or to test the workers as they do the work, but that's kind of costly. It's a lot cheaper to test the materials up front. Okay, so artificial lighting is really important in grow operations. They use, various lights. Some of these systems are quite elaborate. They're on tracks. They move around so that all the leaves are getting exposure, so they get the maximum growth. But what you have to consider with that much lighting is you're going to have an increase in the energy use. And so if you're backfilling a building with a grow operation, you want to make sure that they are considering very carefully the energy use, because your transformers for that site may not be able to handle the capacity. And it can also affect the other businesses. Of course, worst case scenario, you burn the place down. Best case scenario, you blow a bunch of breakers. And hair salons certainly don't like it when their clippers and their blow dryers are not working. And there's nothing worse than an angry hairdresser. I can tell you that from our experience with Arizona Air Company. It also puts additional wear and tear on your electrical equipment, so keep that in mind. Odor mitigation. Whether you have a vape shop, a grow operation, even a cigar shop, odor control is a big issue. One of the most important things you have to understand about odors is if I have a can of gasoline, let's see if I can do this right, it's kind of hard to do, I'm not a camera guy. If this is my can of gasoline and I'm using it as a paperweight, the room will smell like gasoline. And I don't just hand people respirators to mitigate that risk. I take the can of gasoline and I move it outside. That's called source control. If your tenant is a grow operation, a cigar shop, a vape shop, you can't really do source control because that's what they do. So the source is not removable. You could use substitution in the can of gasoline example by taking the gasoline out and putting water in the can, but you really can't substitute oregano for marijuana. People get upset for that, I'm assuming. And so what you can do though, and what you do in your buildings currently is you can enclose the can of gasoline and then you can depressurize that. So what are some examples of depressurized enclosed areas currently in your buildings? Well, bathrooms. Bathrooms are under negative pressure. Air moves from the living space into the bathroom. Janitor's closets. Air moves from the living space into the janitor's closet. Kitchens. Air moves from the dining space into the kitchen. So that those odors are captured, controlled, and exhausted outside. So you're going to have to consider that. Even you have to consider this even for your nail salons that you have in your facility that have acetone odors very strongly. They need to be under negative pressure. They need to have a well-planned, robust exhaust system, a well-planned and robust makeup air, because you don't want to make them so negative that they're sucking air from adjoining suites. So they need to make exhaust, they need a makeup air, and you might consider having them put a vapor barrier between their suite and the adjoining suite. What's a vapor barrier? It can be just a plastic sheeting that goes behind the drywall. In theory, I know some of you are thinking, well, Derrick, these are already firewalls. They're fire-rated walls. They go all the way to the ceiling. There shouldn't be any penetrations between the suites that would allow this air to move. Well, two things about that. Number one is if you've ever looked above a ceiling, there's a whole bunch of holes between the suites that the plumber made or the IT guy made or the cable guy made, and they don't patch them. So one of the things you can do, and I recommend, Paul and I both recommend you do this, is when you have your facility team in the suite, pop the ceiling tiles and look at your demising walls and see if there are holes. If there are holes, they shouldn't be there. That's a fire, life, and safety issue, but it's also an odor control issue. Have them patched so that there's a reduction in the capability for air to migrate from suite A to suite B. You may need to do demolition when these clients turn over. Example would be vape operations use oils, basically propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin in their vape sauce, their vape juice, the e-juice. And that soaks essentially as a vapor when they blow it out, but it then condenses onto surfaces and soaks into your drywall and soaks into your ceiling tiles and gets into your ductwork and gets on your floor. And that may require some demolition because of slip and fall issues or dust collection issues or residual nicotine potential, but it may just have an odor that you need to remove, and demolition might be necessary. A lot of people will try ozonation or other treatments. You know, the best thing to do is not to clean the air. With my can of gasoline example, I don't just try to clean the air. I get rid of the source. There we go. I get rid of the source. So you can continually clean the air, but if you don't get rid of the can of gasoline, which in this case is going to be your marijuana residues or your vape residues, you're going to have a recurrence of that odor. But you can use things like ozone or hydroxyl ions or chlorine dioxide. Just keep in mind, if you're adding any chemicals to the suite, one, it may pose a threat to the applicator, so they have to be careful with how they use these products. They may have to wear personal protective equipment. Two, you can't have people in the building when you apply pesticides or deodorizers because it can pose a threat to the occupants. And three, some of these deodorizers have residual effect. They may oxidize the building, or they may leave a residue that you then have to clean. So just keep that in mind. Grow houses, again, they want to battle pests because they don't want their crops to get eaten by fungi or bacteria or insects. So many of them are going to be using pesticides at a high level. And you want to have something in your lease documents that they need to tell you what pesticides they're using and where they're using them, because it can pose a threat to your building tenants currently as they're applying them, and then the backfilled tenant, you may have an issue because they're going into a suite that's been doused with pesticides on some kind of regular ongoing basis. Another thing to consider is plants. It's great that plants make carbon dioxide. I'm sorry. Plants use carbon dioxide and make oxygen, and that's great. But in order to promote plant growth, some of your grow operations will inject carbon dioxide into the building. Well, there's carbon dioxide in the air that we breathe currently at about 450 parts per million, give or take. And that's not a problem. We measure carbon dioxide in buildings because people breathe out carbon dioxide. And so we actually use carbon dioxide as a surrogate to determine if you're getting enough outside air ventilation. And in theory, you shouldn't be above 700 above outdoors. So if outdoors 400, you shouldn't be above 1100 ppm, parts per million indoors. The permissible exposure limit for carbon dioxide is 5,000 ppm. And the amount it takes to kill you, the immediate danger to life and health, is 30,000 ppm. Why am I telling you all those numbers? A lot of your buildings have carbon dioxide in them. Soda fountains, beer spigots, they bring in these small containers of carbon dioxide so they can keep the beverages carbonated. And if one of those canisters let loose, it's usually not enough to fill the building with carbon dioxide at any level of concern. But a lot of your restaurants now have these cryogenic tanks. So instead of compressed gas carbon dioxide, this is liquid carbon dioxide. So it's much more dense. And these are much bigger tanks. And they're centralized in some location where a truck can fill them up. So in order to get that carbon dioxide into the suite, into the grow house, or into the restaurant, there's a series of piping. And piping is comprised of runs and fittings. And anywhere there's a joint, there's a potential for failure. And these cryogenic tanks can leak at a significant amount and cause death. They can asphyxiate your occupants. And unfortunately, you can't smell carbon dioxide. And so people will walk into the building, go to their workstation, pass out, and they won't be found until it's too late. And so your tenants, if they're going to be pumping in carbon dioxide, be it a restaurant using these cryogenic tanks, or be it a grow house using these cryogenic tanks, you absolutely want them to have carbon dioxide alarms so that people are not dying in your building, because that is bad for business. How are we doing on time, Mr. Anderson?
Good.
We're good? All right.
7:32.
Good. Paul's really the quiet one of the two of us, but he's much smarter than me. So oil, juice. We talked about this just a moment ago. Propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin. If you've ever been in one of these vape shops, the floor is slippery because there's so much oil. That oil is a slip and fall hazard to you and your building owners. I haven't seen any slip and fall lawsuits successfully for these vape shops, but I've been in them and I've almost fallen on my keister multiple times. They need to be cleaning their floors on a regular basis so that they mitigate that slip and fall issue. And when they turn the suite over to you, you have to recognize there's going to be a coating of oil on everything. One of the things that this oil coats is your HVAC system. So your cooling coils will get covered in oil, and oil is sticky. So then you have dust buildup on your cooling coils, which then causes mold growth and bacterial growth on your coils. And then that dust falls into the pan, that oil falls into the pan, makes this goobery substance that then clogs the drip pan and overflows when we have high humidity environments. So keep that in mind, that when you turn over a vape shop, you may have to demolish the walls. You may have to demolish the ceiling panels. Uh-oh, David, I just gave you a good compliment.
For the Southwest Gas.
David, put yourself on mute. You have a buildup of oil that you may have to demolish these building materials when you turn the client over. So you have to consider that in your leases, however that works best for you, but it's definitely a factor. Also, these vape shops have been adding nicotine to their products. A lot of these folks are doing, compounding, which is the term we would use, but other people might use amateur chemistry. They're mixing their own custom juices, right? Even your marijuana dispensaries are mixing THC in their products. Nicotine is a poison, make no mistake. And they buy this nicotine in a pure form and then they mix it with their products. Well, if there's any spillage, overflows, those kind of things, you can have these flavorants, this nicotine, THC on surfaces, and that can be harmful to people who then touch the surface or later occupy the space from inhalation or ingestion. And so you need to consider that. So we covered a whole bunch of stuff. I am hoping that Paul's going to tell me we have some great questions. Now is a good time if you have a question to ask it. And if you need to reach out to us after this event, this is how you contact us. So Mr. Anderson, do we have any questions?
We have no written questions, so maybe somebody wants to ask one verbally.
Please feel free to type your question in the chat feature or unmute yourself and ask away.
And I recognize that asking questions among your peers is sometimes embarrassing. So if you want to send us a private question, I promise I won't call you out by name. All right, well, I don't have any questions at this time. So I hope that everyone got something out of this. I know I covered a wide variety of stuff. It is certainly not exhaustive. Paul and I have been in many buildings with problems, and we could give you tons of anecdotes, but we hope that this presentation gave you an overview of the things you might encounter. We would recommend you attack these things internally, have some discussions with your team as to what are the risk factors. Do you want to lease to these types of tenants? Two, you want to go over your lease documents and make sure that your lease documents offer you protection. Three, you want to talk to your insurer to make sure that you will get some level of coverage, or at least you know the risk of coverage for having these types of tenants. Not only the risk for the tenant that is a vape shop or a marijuana grow operation or a marijuana sales operation, but also mitigating the risk for your adjoining tenants sharing the same buildings. If it's a triple net lease, it's usually not as big a deal because they're supposed to take care of their equipment. I didn't really cover this earlier, but keep in mind that if it's a full service lease, you're going to have a higher degree of cost maintaining these suites. And so you want to make sure you consider that, because the air conditioning is more likely to fail on an accelerated schedule, for example, because of these operations. The lighting systems, the fire life and safety systems, as I mentioned, will have a higher propensity to fail prematurely. And if you're a full service lease situation, that's a cost that's getting passed to you. So keep that in mind. All right, Olympia. Paul says we have no questions, so we're going to turn it back over to you.
Great, that's wonderful. I have a sneaking suspicion someone has a question that they are apprehensive about asking. So I'm going to give everyone just another couple of minutes if you have a question to type it in or unmute yourself and ask away. If there are no questions, then we're going to thank our presenters, Derrick and Paul, very much for all of the information, and keep a lookout in your email. We'll send you some materials later on today. And I still see no questions.
Well, we appreciate BOMA allowing us the opportunity to share some of our expertise on marijuana and vape, leases and operations. And if you have any questions about indoor environmental quality issues, be they COVID-19, we're very busy right now doing respiratory protection programs, fit testing, helping people to establish wellness checkpoints. What are the pros and cons? That's really been quite a good use of our skills. But any indoor environmental quality issue, from water and Legionella to asbestos and mold, we are happy to assist you with. So that's our contact information there. Write it down, put us in your speed dial, and we'll bid you adieu.
Wonderful. Thanks again. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Very thorough. Thank you.